tender-hearted terror junkies. I'm Lucius Voss, and tonight we gather once more at the edge of all things beautiful and bleak. We're digging into love, that sweet, sticky emotion that clings like grave mold and doesn't know when to let go. Yes, tonight's stories drip with devotion and something a little more pungent. One tale charts the descent of a man into a hole that may or may not exist. The other, a sister's grief takes root and sprouts teeth. They say love never dies. Turns out, it just mutates into something grotesque and unrecognizable, like your ex, but with more fungus. Our first story blooms from the rotten soil of J.R. Hamantaschen's haunted mind, courtesy of Velix Books, with narration by the ever unhinged and probably nude Geoff Sturtevant. We present Short Bloom, Long Fading.
This isn't a story to tell. It's just me, just what I remember, and what I think about sometimes. Well, some parts often, some parts only sometimes. I think about Elizabeth often. The other parts I only think about sometimes, and when I think about them, ironically, it's because I feel bad that I don't think about them more often. I loved Elizabeth. Thinking that reminds me of that classic Mitch Hedberg joke. I used to do drugs. I still do, but I used to also. I used to love Elizabeth, and I still do. I've always loved her. Which of course can't possibly be true. But I can't think of a time when I didn't. Maybe if I'm being literal, I didn't love her immediately as a child, when I must have first seen her in the elevator of our apartment building, when I didn't yet know the differences between girls and boys. I guess I loved her from the moment I became a thinking, conscious person. I can't say I know what love is. That doesn't square with what I just said. But I connect the feeling I associate with love with Elizabeth. No one really knows exactly what love is, and I've had girlfriends, but never felt for them the way I did with Elizabeth. I cared about her, wanted what's best for her, wanted to protect her, wanted her to flourish. Everything about her soothed me. I remember as a child, we used to check for holes together. She's the first person I can remember checking for holes with. But that can't be possible, because certainly my parents were the first, and aunts and uncles and other family members and preschool teachers after them. All would have taught me all about checking for holes. That could be taken the wrong way. If only. The old checking for holes. That's an old person joke. They say something like, I remember a time when checking for holes was the most fun thing you could do with someone on a Saturday night. Or something like that. Elizabeth, at least as a child, was punctual and meticulous like me, and loved checking, rechecking, and making childish maps and graphs, checking off the places we've searched. Everyone does hole hunting, and in a sense is into it the same way that everyone with basic self-preservation is into looking both ways before crossing the street. But we were a cut above, running around our apartment building. It had the benefit of being a scavenger hunt and knowing we were, in a very real sense, helping people out. Actually finding a hole was rare, but we always sort of hoped we'd find one. I'm talking about when we were little kids and didn't know any better, and made it a friendly competition, each hoping we'd be the one to find a hole, and be able to report it to an adult. It was so satisfying thinking about a hole plugged up with caulk, the fizzy sound caulk made when expanding, that concluding, suctiony glurp sound when the hole was saturated, and we both agreed the caulk looked like toasted marshmallows. We'd joke about wanting to eat it. I guess some kids must have actually eaten it, because no caulk has that same color and consistency anymore. At least not the brands I've seen. People thought I became so obsessed with hole hunting because of what happened to Barney, although that happened when I was about 9, and I was totally into hole hunting before then. I'll never get another dog, even though I'm great with animals, and dogs take a natural liking to me. I know all the dog-appeasing tricks. Lay down, expose your belly, rub them behind the ears. But I'm loyal, and Barney was my dog and probably the world's most beautiful basset hound. I feel terrible, even though everyone told me there was nothing I could do. A walk in the park near our apartment. Quick walk, just to let him pee. Only turned my head for a second, and I only turned back because the leash pulled awkwardly, and Barney had fallen on his side. I thought he must have tripped, except dogs, of course, don't trip like humans do. I was immediately terrified and pulled the leash, but he was pinned at the paw and he wasn't moving. Even though I knew there'd be no way of lifting him up off the ground, I went to try, until some others realized what must have happened and pulled me away, which is when I started going berserk with shame and fear. At least I know he died instantly, probably dead before he hit the ground. I was taken away as I screamed. There's nothing to do once someone walks over a hole and gets stung. The stinger goes into the flesh. Doesn't matter if it has to go through a boot or a paw to get there. Then it splits into 2 moorings like an anchor, and there's no moving it. Just waiting for the hours until liquefaction. I remember someone threw a thin blanket over Barney, and that somehow made things worse. If no one had done that, I could still see Barney, looking as he always did. I could pet and hug him, because you couldn't tell what was happening underneath for some time, and that's some kind of closure. Instead, I'd see only a lump beneath the sheet, a lump that would become irregular and smaller, being slurped up in the hole. Barney was a good dog, and he served a purpose, and I suppose it's better we learned of that hole through his sacrifice, rather than some kid from the neighborhood. Of course, I'd have traded almost any kid from the neighborhood for Barney. I know my parents got some money from the Parks Department in a settlement, but I didn't care about that. I only wanted Barney back. Elizabeth helped me get through it. She felt ashamed, too, because she was an avid hole hunter. Felt like she failed, too. Even though we searched the apartment building, not the park, we could only do so much. Maybe that was the death of some of our innocence, revealing our hole hunting as just an ineffectual kid's game. No, that's not real. People don't think in terms like that. I'm only thinking that because I'm reflecting. In the natural course of things, you never think in those grand terms. That's just my brain pretending there was meaning where there wasn't. I know that some people can't deal with the existence of the holes, or really what they represent. They can't take the fact that there exists something that appeared so suddenly, that we can't eliminate, that can kill us so quickly and remorselessly. And what's worse, how interconnected the holes all are. That's what probably gets people the most and makes them jealous. All these holes around the world. One species, all working together. But there have always existed strange, frightening, freaky things. Plague rats, giant octopuses, hammerhead sharks, grizzly bears. These holes began long before I was born. So to me, they just are. And I don't think much about the backstory. Who knows and has time to think about all that? And people just want excuses to feel dismal and hopeless. Elizabeth and I never had a falling out, but grew apart as we got older. School and all that. Her helping me with Barney was probably the sweetest single interaction with her I remember. But even as we grew apart, there was never any unpleasantness. I wasn't the only person aware of her charming sweetness, and I never interfered when classmates, more confident, more direct, more suitable for her really, made efforts to get to know her. I'd observe her from afar, and we'd talk and catch up, although not as often as I liked. Like only maybe if my family ran into her family in the apartment building. I think sometimes that she became more beautiful as she got older, but I don't even know what that means really, or if it's true, or whether hormones and development distort that perception. I always loved her, and those feelings were unwavering. I knew this about myself, that even if she had become physically unappealing, my love for her would have remained the same. Maybe my shyness would have proportionately decreased, as the way others fawned over her intimidated me, but my love always remained pure. People have told me how romantic that all is, and how Elizabeth would have loved to hear that. I don't think that's true. Senior year of high school, and I found her on the kitchen floor of her apartment, on her back in a strange position. Her left heel was flattened to the floor as if pinned, the leg bent at the knee, her heel pressed down so tightly on the floor that I remember the toes of her left foot were lifting off the ground, as if reaching upward to the heavens to flee. She was sprawled out. Her left bent knee seemed so high up in relation to the rest of her, and her right leg was ungainly splayed out. There was an open box of frosted mini-wheats on the counter. Her fallen body, even in its awkward position, still fit so snugly in the tight confines of her narrow kitchen. It was odd how, if she had just been a bit taller or bigger, that some part of her would be pressed uncomfortably against a side cabinet or the dishwasher. Why do I remember those details? With the shock, I should have forgotten why I was there in the first place, but I remember. Our family had borrowed some light bulbs from hers, and I was sent down to return the favor. And I guess I knocked and then just tried the door. It was obvious what had happened. Under her left heel, I knew I'd find a tiny hole. And from that tiny hole, no doubt piercing through the thin fabric of her sock into her foot, was some beak-like sliver of a stinger. The hole could have formed in just a day or two. I don't know if her enthusiasm for constant hole searching had abated as she'd gotten older and busier. You can only spend so much time in the day being cautious. I know I looked at her for a while. I wanted to call out for her parents, but there's a sense all humans have when we know that a place is empty. I didn't know where they'd gone, but I knew her parents often went on weekends to her maternal grandparents' house, and she didn't always go. It's hard to know if I thought that then or just thought that at some later time, when no one came home the entire time I was there. Looking at her face, you could think she was only indolently dreaming. Divorced from context, that is. Move back and see her all discombobulated and stretched out, or ask yourself what she was doing on her back on the kitchen floor in the first place. And you knew. I stood over her and I felt I had so much to say to her. I recognized that my love for her, in a sense, transformed her in my mind from a real-life person into a concept. That wasn't fair. I should have treated her as a real person. What was my love based on if not an idea? An idealized conception. I'm not stupid. I can think deeply. I almost felt ashamed of my love then, and even of how pure and untouched she looked before me. I knew that she'd been tranquilized to death, that the innards were dissolving, and if I returned in only half a day, the features of her face would have sunken. The symmetry shifted and lost. Maybe that would be good to see, to appreciate her as a real person. Am I avoiding, excusing, rationalizing? What do I do, really? All I saw of her would be gone, slush that dripped out of her clothing, down into the hungry sucker that extended through that hole, no bigger than what a ballpoint pen makes when driven through loose-leaf paper. I expressed my love for her. I treated her as a real person. I made love to her. That's what I did. Yes, that's what I did, and it was beautiful, and I'm not ashamed to say it. I put her arms tightly around my body, and I held her firmly, kissing her, nuzzling her, trying to communicate the ecstasy of my love to her. If she could still feel it, feel anything, maybe somewhere deep below in that obscuration where she dwelled. I'm deluding myself. I'm thinking of smart words I might not even be using correctly. Obscuration. What does that even mean? Is that a word? My self-deluding theory being that a smart person makes smart decisions, so I use smart words. I'm smart, and must have made a smart decision. I knew she was essentially dead. I like to think otherwise, but I knew. When I was young, really young, like in elementary school, people would tell me I was sick. I won a weirdness award in my 4th grade yearbook, which I'm surprised they allowed, like school-sanctified mockery. Hopefully there's something wrong with me, fundamentally wrong with me, and as she became consumed, my poisonous seed mixed up in the slurry she became, making what lived in that hole sick and diseased, like me. Wouldn't that be a thought? Saved the world. Took our world back to the way it once was, all because our dominant predator inadvertently drank my cum. Making jokes to myself, lightening my own mood. When you're laughing, you aren't thinking clearly. Or sugar with the medicine, or whatever the apt expression is. This was years ago, well over a decade now. I'm a different person. No, I'm not. People don't really change. Yet I don't feel bad, not really. I only feel bad when I think about details that, if I told others about, they would act like I did something terrible. But they don't really know. I loved her, this much is true. That still remains. I know what I felt. I know what I intended. And I know that I loved her. Excuse-making, maybe. But I think about how some people reacted when I told them how my love for her stayed pure, and how they said how romantic that was. I thought that well before I did what I did. Even that phrasing, did what I did, makes it sound like I did something wrong. What did I do, except take the last possible chance to convey my love for her?
Now, there's a kind of love that gnaws at your ribs. A hunger so sincere it forgets it's supposed to stop once the heart's gone cold. He dug deep. He clung harder. He lost everything but the ache. Some say he was mad. Others say he was romantic. I say he just needed a better hobby. Now, on to something a little closer to home. Family, floral arrangements, and an appetite that turns mourning into mulch. written by the dreadfully delightful NM Brown, and brought to life by Jason Crum and Olivia Steele. Our next tale is Child of the Garden. Bring gloves, this one bites.
Child of the Garden. A heavy mist rolled over the lush grass of the cemetery, muting the hues of green land and blue sky with a heavy veil of gray. The already morose atmosphere was exaggerated, with the crowds of friends and family members swallowed in black clothes. We must have looked like something out of an old black and white drama film to those late to the service. If I hadn't been among the first to arrive, I certainly would have thought so. Blobs of black and white trim, growing larger and more clear with each mournful step. I clasped my hands together respectfully, unsure of what else to do with them. Each time I strayed from that position, I found myself doing something inappropriate for the situation. Scratching at a muted mustard stain on my tie, scratching my beard. I even reached inside my pocket for my phone once. The words of the minister faded into a dull drone, becoming inaudible altogether once my sister Lana's shoulders began to heave with sobs. I felt so many emotions, all at the same time. All the wrong ones. I felt awful. Awful that I didn't understand what my sister was going through. Awful that I didn't feel more broken at her loss. Awful that I couldn't wait to get her home so I could get something to eat and put this day behind me. Nevertheless, I put my arm around her and pulled her close, ignoring the wetness of tears gathering on the front of my shirt. As weird as it is to say, I think at the time I was honestly just relieved to finally know what to do with my hands. Lana was on the cusp of entering the second trimester of pregnancy with her first child, and the pregnancy hormones had not been kind to her. She had gotten sick before she even bought the first test, and the relentless nausea showed no signs of subsiding. This, accompanied with her not wanting to eat due to grief and anxiety, made for a difficult pregnancy. I was thankful to take her in. I loved my sister. However, I had less than no experience with grief, and even less with pregnancy. I always figured if I ever lived with a pregnant woman, that I would have been the one who made her that way. This was a different ballgame entirely. Of course, it was only natural that the death of her husband, co-parent, and love of her life accelerated her symptoms. She and Johnny had been together since they were teenagers, high school sweethearts and all that. He had asked our father if he could take Lana to his senior prom. Despite his initial reservations due to the fact that she was only a sophomore at the time, he eventually agreed, not wanting the dazzling smile to wane from his only daughter's beautiful face. In some ways, I wonder if she secretly blamed him for the amount of pain she was in. Was she ultimately thankful to have loved and lost, or did she wish to never experience any of it at all, erasing it in her mind and heart completely? Loved ones gathered after the Reverend's final reading, each reaching into the mound of dirt that would soon consume the outer casket of my dearly departed brother-in-law. The mixture of petrichor and fresh flowers filled the air as they lined up to help bury their lost. Lana clawed her bony fingers into the fresh soil, grabbing far too much for a single hand to carry. Clumps of umber tumbled from between her fingers, though her fist was clenched so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She hesitated once she reached the freshly lowered casket, the gleaming white of the wood glistening in the tears in her melancholy eyes. Her fist trembled as she realized this would be the last act of kindness and respect she can physically show toward her husband. However, those same actions would be the ones to help seal him in the ground forever. It didn't seem right, even to me, and I could tell Lana was beyond having a hard time of it. Grasping my own handful of freshly unearthed land in my own palm, I walked over to stand beside my shattered sister. I reached my hand out over the recessed hole that would be her husband's new home and waited for her to gather the courage to do the same. After a few moments, her eyes met mine, and she held her hand out. I nodded, We both took deep breaths and released the soil over the grave. "I'm proud of you," I whispered to her. "Johnny would have been too." She smiled at this, and even though it was slight, I was still intensely grateful for it. Lana's frail figure looked downright sickly as we left the procession, arms bone-like and gangly, like a bird's wing that had its feathers violently ripped off. Her collarbone pressed against the skin of her neck, as if desperately trying to break free. Her knees and elbows resembled tiny nubs under the skin, connectors for the sticks and twigs that had become her arms and legs. She looked ethereal in her grief and heartache, crying out in anguish each time her hand grazed her growing belly. At first, I thought something was wrong. Maybe this was all too much for her, and it was causing problems with the baby. She later told me that it was the realization that the cemetery, a sad and barren place, would be the only location that her family could ever gather at. She described wanting to have birthday parties there for her baby, then cried because she knew no one would come.
So, either his dad misses his birthday party or no one shows up and he's heartbroken.
She sighed through hitching breaths. The air was silent and tense on the short ride home from the cemetery. I was torn between rushing to get home out of these stiff clothes and taking my time, knowing my sister was in no hurry to leave her husband behind in the cold, wet ground. Lana held her breath the entire way down the length of my driveway, anxious to greet the new and unfamiliar place she'd have to learn to call home. We walked around the yard a bit before I decided to take her inside the house. Lana stopped to observe the garden, seeming fascinated with it. I chuckled under my breath as she reached down into the ground and pulled up a carrot. "Hey, those aren't—" I started to scold her, but thought better of it. "Ready yet." I let the rest of my sentence trail off in the wind as she bit into the dirt-dusted vegetable. She reminded me of a modern Scarlett O'Hara in the field, holding her fist high and swearing she'd never go hungry again. "I can get us a pizza," I suggested as she walked back toward me, tiptoeing to avoid damaging any plants.
Nah, I don't want anything heavy sitting in the pit of my stomach. My emotions are all over the place right now, and the last thing I want to do is puke again.
She held up the carrot.
This is good. Did you do all this yourself? Johnny and I always said we were going to plant one when we stopped renting and bought our own place.
Her eyes swelled up with a fresh reserve of tears, and she held up her hand, a signal that she wasn't ready to continue her train of thought. I cleared my throat sympathetically. It wasn't all me. The land was already tilled and plotted when I moved in. I just kind of dropped the seeds into the ground and smeared dirt over them with my foot." I rubbed my hand over the back of my neck, surprised to find it sun-kissed and tender from an afternoon spent under a cloudy sky. "Let's go inside. You can check out the guest room I made up for you." I had gone out and bought pinks and purples of everything, like she had in her room as a teenager. After the bed and curtains were all set up, I'd thankfully thought better of it, opting to go with navy blues and grays instead. We weren't kids anymore, and as much as I was sure that she longed for a simpler time, it just made my stomach queasy thinking of her walking out of a graveyard and straight into Candyland. She seemed pleased with the room, just overwhelmingly tired. Who the hell could blame her after all she'd been through? It was hard to sleep that first night. The first few nights, actually. Lana had cried herself to sleep in a room not 10 feet down the hallway from my own, and the walls were less than thin. As much as I would have loved to offer her something to help calm her down, I knew she needed to do this in her own way. My sister had never been a fan of medicinal healing, and I didn't want to make things worse by offering something that would be of no use to her. Eventually, over the coming days, she was able to find a form of peace when she laid down at night, and I was glad to hear her snoring instead of sobbing every night. That all changed the night of the lightning storm. Tree branches scratched against my window, waking me from a sound sleep. The wet outside sky illuminated with lightning. I hesitated while I waited for thunder that never came. After tossing and turning fitfully, I decided to give up the ghost and go to the kitchen for a drink. Once I visited the restroom, I paused outside of Lana's door. The last thing I wanted to do was disturb her, but I figured maybe it still wouldn't hurt to check on her. This was one of her first nights sleeping alone in a new place during a fierce lightning storm. Nothing but silence greeted me as I tapped my knuckles lightly on the doorframe. I peered inside, hoping to find her sleeping. However, the bed and room were empty. She wasn't in the bathroom. I knew this because I'd just come from there.
"Hey, Lana, you all right?"
I called out as I headed towards the kitchen, assuming that's where I'd find her. But my words drifted out to an empty room. The only hint I'd received that she was still there was that the side door was left wide open, the cold and wet wind blowing streaks of moisture into the house. 5-toed footprints led away from the back patio, followed by the imprint of the side of her foot and heel mark. Her footsteps led me to the middle of the yard, where I found her, crunched down in the middle of the garden. Her soaking wet nightgown whipped at her ankles in the blustery wind. She had her back to me, so I couldn't see what she was doing at first. It looked like she was digging at something, throwing chunks of mud over her shoulder wildly, similar to a dog catching the scent of a long-lost bone and digging it up in a frenzy. My mind flooded with worst-case scenarios. Please tell me she didn't give birth in the middle of the night and was burying the baby among my lettuce and cucumbers, my mind screamed. Fearing the worst, I approached her from the rear left side, maintaining a good distance between us. As much as I wish I could say it was for her sake, I'd be lying if I did. I took my time because I didn't know if I would be ready to see whatever she was doing, and I desperately wanted to take my time. The thought nagged at me to turn around, silently tiptoe back into the house and pretend the whole thing didn't happen. Lana and I would be none the wiser in the morning, and things could stay the same. That's not what happened, though. I called her name a few moments after I came into her line of sight. Her brown eyes shot up wildly, and her whole body froze like a deer in headlights. Dark smears covered her cheeks, chin, and lips, and her teeth were gnashing frantically on whatever she chewed on. Tears ran down her face, washing clean trails down the muck spread over the lower half of her face. She choked on whatever it was, sending brown sludge spewing from her mouth on the ground in front of her.
"Lana, what's going on? What on earth are you doing out here? It's raining like crazy and you're soaking wet."
Ray,
She sputtered through slime-stained teeth.
I pulled a radish from the garden yesterday and ate it. Ever since then, I can't stop thinking about the taste. I tried fresh produce from the store and I didn't want any of it. I realize now that what I wanted was the dirt. Jesus Christ, what is wrong with me?
I held up my hands in a feeble attempt to gain control of not only her emotions, but the situation as a whole.
"First off, is the baby okay?"
Her hands flew to her stomach in a panic.
Yeah, I think so. He kicked me not 5 minutes ago. Why?
She stood up and twirled around, searching the ground in front of her dreadfully.
I'm not bleeding, am I?
"No, nothing like that. I just got scared. I thought maybe something bad happened, and you had the baby early,"
I admitted ruefully.
So you thought I'd just hobble out here in my nightgown and bury my baby in the middle of the night?
She demanded incredulously.
You watch too much ID Discovery Channel. That's what's wrong with you.
With that, she strode past me and into the house, leaving an angry set of muddy footprints for me to clean up in her wake. People could call me a lot of things, but unsupportive was not one of them. I'd decided to try and rise above my fear and take action. I'd gotten her the most organic vegetables that I could find, cooked up mushrooms for her with the dirt they grew and still dusted on them, Hell, I even downloaded fucking Pinterest and made her one of those graveyard cakes. You know the ones. They have chocolate cake on the bottom, pudding in the middle, and crushed up Oreos on top to represent dirt. After it's set up, you insert little gummy worms for added effect, texture, and taste. I hoped the childishness of it would cheer her up at least. As much as she loved it, she gagged in revulsion after only 2 bites, just as she had with everything else I'd presented her with. 2 gratefully uneventful weeks later, it happened again. I woke up to the eerie sight of Lana's empty bed and my side door wide open, leaving my house completely vulnerable and unprotected. I was a little less freaked out this time, but all the more worried. Her next appointment with the doctor was still 3 days away, and I had no idea what kind of effects the ingestion of dirt had on a growing fetus. Something was different this time. A crunching sound resonated from between her teeth, a sound that I knew dirt couldn't make. She held something unidentifiable in her hands, gripping it tightly as she ripped pieces from it with her teeth. A 4-fingered hand stuck sideways in the dirt, the missing digit eventually being gruesomely identified as the thing clutched in my sister's ravenous clutches. The meat attached tore away semi-easily, and she sucked on the bits that clung to the bone like she was eating buffalo wings. The sounds alone were enough to drive someone to nausea and great mental discomfort.
Holy fuck, Lana!
I stammered. She dropped the bone she held in her hand, spitting out a detached fingernail into the dirt at her feet before addressing me directly.
I couldn't stop.
She began.
Is he?
She paused, as if she wasn't sure she wanted the answer to the question she was about to ask.
Is he someone you knew?
I jumped back, my feet sliding slightly in the mud around me.
Someone I knew? No, he isn't.
I gestured to the mound of dirt she was still squatting in front of.
You can't have thought that I did this.
My voice shaky with offense and shock.
Well, it sure as hell wasn't me. I could barely put my own shoes on by myself, let alone burying a body half-assed underneath your growing garden. No, whoever did this put him here before you started planting.
How did I not notice it while digging before?
My voice shook fretfully as I ran my hands through my sleep-addled hair. I realized my hands were also suffering from mild tremors of fear.
With all the rain we've had this month, there was bound to be erosion of the soil. More than you could have caused yourself by digging.
We need to call the police. My mind spun perpetually through a dozen possibilities on an internal wheel of dread, each option just as terrible as the one before. What in the utter hell was I supposed to do with this newfound phase she'd stumbled into? I'd done my best to read up on the many stages of grief, and I was definitely confident that cannibalism sure as fuck wasn't one of them. How was I supposed to feel comfortable with her living in my house? When our father wheezed out his last wishes for me to watch over her before death, this couldn't have been what he meant. Was I safe? Was she and her baby? What if she decided she wanted something fresher? Was I supposed to provide her fresh meat in order to save my own from being ravaged? She choked out a retort.
Yeah, sure, Ray. And say what? Hi, can you please send someone out? I just found my sister eating the body that's buried in the garden of my backyard. We are both just as fucked here. That's a Child Protective Services wet dream, not to mention all the questioning and possible prison time for a murder that neither of us committed.
Another thought entered my mind, pushing everything else over the precipice of vital importance. So, it's not the dirt you're craving, but... I paused, grabbing a lump of fat from my arm between my thumb and forefinger.
This?
I gagged in spite of myself, not wanting to hurt my sister's feelings. I knew better than to make her uncomfortable by waiting for an answer that we both already knew. A few days later, Lana and I took a walk around the town plaza to get her out of the house and expose her to some much-needed fresh air and socialization. Someone had run over a squirrel in one of the pathways that we had to cross to get to the other row of shops. Lana froze in place the instant she saw it. The corners of her mouth twitched before she wiped them on the sleeve of her shirt, the fabric coming away from her mouth dark and wet. Strings of drool poured through her lips as she struggled to keep it in her mouth. She seemed to be producing it faster than she could swallow it back down. When she tried to spit it out, it only made it worse. Her eyes looked at me through tears of shame and panic as we made our way back to the car. Once inside, Lana began to cry uncontrollably.
Oh my God, Ray! I wanted it! And I wanted it so bad.
I looked at her in confusion, appreciative of the fact that her salivating had ceased. Wanted what exactly?
The squirrel! I wanted to eat that fucking squirrel worse than I've wanted to eat anything in my whole entire life.
She cried in anguish. My sister refused to leave the house much after that, much to my dismay. I didn't want to be heartless and leave her here alone, but at the same time, I found her presence increasingly unsettling, as I found myself becoming more afraid of her actions and behaviors. My mind wrestled on what to do for the entire next couple of weeks. There'd only been one instance where I'd heard Lana leave her bedroom and creep out the side door in the middle of the night, one which I'd left uninvestigated. My breath held in my throat, and fresh beads of anxious sweat broke out across my forehead as I heard her footsteps pass by my doorway. I'd gotten an internal lock on my bedroom door, just in case of any evolution in cravings. I didn't dare to release it from my lungs until I heard her feet shuffle across the kitchen tiles. The pros and cons of each action versus consequence were endless, and the pressure was quickly mounting. The prospect of involving anyone of an authoritative capacity terrified me, if I was honest, even more so than the thought of living with a bloodthirsty pregnant woman. Not to mention the idea of my niece or nephew growing up an orphan. To have lost their father before they were ever born was one thing. To sever the emotional and biological link altogether by losing both parents was just too much to bear. And I've never really been too crazy about children. More than anything, I just wanted it all to go away. And it did, in a way, for a little while at least. I woke from a nightmarish sleep to the blissful smell of cinnamon and sausage wafting from the kitchen. Lana was not only feeling better, but awake and cooking breakfast. My heart soared at the bit of normalcy after such a bizarre and heart-wrenching month. "Hey kiddos," I joked, gesturing toward her pregnant stomach. "How are we this morning?"
As best as I can be,
she answered.
My stomach feels settled enough to eat something normal for once.
No, odd cravings then? Her cheeks blanched slightly as she shook her head in confirmation.
Oh, Ray, what are we gonna do about the garden?
I felt my muscles unclench one at a time with relief. I knew we weren't out of the woods yet, but if she was eating normally today, maybe I could get some sound sleep that night. I've actually been thinking a lot about that. I say we move the hell out of here the first chance we get. Find somewhere that's a little bigger for you and the baby to have more space to thrive and grow. Let the body be someone else's problem, like the previous tenant left it to be our problem. I explained matter-of-factly. In fact, I've already started looking here and there. Relief flooded her features as she set a steaming plate of food down in front of me. Her labor was arduous, but swift. We had been through so much together in such a short time, none of which either of us were ready for. I was hopeful that the birth of the baby would bring an anticlimactic end to it all. No more cravings, no more dead bodies, just a normal life. I found myself counting the ceiling tiles in the waiting area to keep myself occupied in the meantime, mildly put off by how many of the nurses assumed I was the child's father. They wore looks of judgment and disgust as I refused to offer to accompany Lana in the delivery room, heavily opting for the waiting area instead. Sure, I could have gone through the whole song and dance of explaining how my brother-in-law died, leaving my pregnant sister a grieving widow, and then I took her in to help give her a sense of stability and family during this hard and trying time. But I was tired. So very tired. My mind was filled with things that didn't make sense. Things that I wished to God and the devil didn't exist. If absorbing their judgment was the price I paid for the peace of silence, well, then that was just fine by me. By the time they allowed me back to see her, the baby was just being dried off from its first bath. It was a beautiful baby, a boy she requested to be named Jonathan Raymond. Jonathan after his late father, and of course Raymond after me. I didn't think that I deserved the honor, but at least she didn't name him Jeffrey, right? The color had mostly returned to my sister's face. She was no longer the sallow ghost of a woman that had graced my home for the past 5 months. Lana's attending nurse came in to take her vitals and deliver her dinner tray a couple of hours after I'd arrived. Baby Jonathan had just fallen asleep in my arms, and a nurse had just helped Lana take her first postpartum shower. My breath caught in my throat as I waited for my sister to regard the food in front of her. The plastic lid was lifted away as it was set down on the table tray in front of her. Cutlets of chicken breast sat in a golden-colored sauce with broccoli and plain rice accompanying it on the side tray areas. She was given a small carton of chocolate milk and a sealed plastic cup of juice, reminiscent of our school lunches as children. Thankfully, after a few pokes and prods of trepidation, she inhaled the food with relief as she took her first bite.
Holy fuck, this is good.
She beamed through a mouthful of food. The entire tray was gone in a matter of minutes, despite me suggesting she slow down so she didn't take the risk of tasting it all twice. I'd figured she'd done enough vomiting for a good while, and was more than sure that she agreed. Just then, the baby woke up and began cooing while I held him close. He turned his head until his mouth met the tip of my finger. "You're not going to get anything out of there, little guy," I joked. The first of what I hoped would be many between cheeky uncle and nephew. Something in the way he looked at me unnerved me. They say that babies don't have clear vision until they're at least a year old. But Jonathan was looking at me. His mouth mashed down on my finger voraciously, aggravating a cut I'd suffered while patching some of the holes Lana had dug the morning before. An almost infinitesimal amount of blood trickled onto his lips before he wiped it away. A lucky reflex that he had no control of yet seemed to go exactly where necessary. The moment he tasted the blood, I swear to God and all that is unholy, he smiled.
In the end, Lana found her peace, or at least something compostable. Grief has roots, deep ones, and when you water them with love and a little madness, well, sometimes you get closure. Sometimes you get something that chews through the plumbing. If these stories left you questioning your emotional stability or your landscaping choices, do the decent thing. Like, follow, leave a comment, maybe scream into a flower pot. Until we meet again, I'm Lucius Voss. Keep your lights low, your windows locked, and remember, if the garden starts whispering your name, don't answer back. That's how it gets in. Good night.